Hello, this is Robin Dennison. This module is 13. Can you believe we're already here? This is the very last module of 628. And this particular module we're going to be talking about assignments, as in non-exam assignments, and how to develop and use grading rubrics for the evaluation of those particular assignments. We'll also spend some time talking about your evaluation plan for a course and how you weight those components of the evaluation for the course. So first of all, my probably most important point in this particular presentation is to emphasize that we really do need variety in evaluation. I get really concerned about courses where it's all exams. That's the only method of evaluation, is it's all examinations. We know, of course, that many students do not do well on exams, and once again, yes, I know they have to pass NCLEX, and so exams are important, but we should also give them alternative ways to excel and to really show that they know the information. And so that's why I firmly believe that variety is very important. Also, and this is crucially important with your final project too, is your evaluation methods must match your objectives. And that is, if you look at your objectives and the objectives are select, identify, describe, then that can certainly be evaluated with a multiple choice exam. However, if your objective is write, compose, develop, design, assemble, then those are things that cannot be evaluated through a multiple choice exam. And so you need to have alternative methods of evaluation. So keep that in mind as you look at your course objectives in particular for your course. If those are your course objectives, then your evaluation plan has to fit those course objectives. And you can decide according to those course objectives how much weighting each of those particular evaluation methods needs to have. How important is the objective, and therefore how much weighting the evaluation method should have. So for instance, you may very well have an exam for undergraduates where 75% of the grade is based on exams, especially if you're talking about early in the curriculum. And then 25% is based on non-exam methods such as presentations or papers or whatever. A lot of debate about a lot of these things that I'm hopeful that we can talk about during our live seminars, and they're things like, do you give grades for participation? My personal feeling is that the expectation of you being in college, student being in college, is that they're expected to be there. I'm certainly sure that if you're in a practice setting, you expect your learner, your new graduate, to be there. So the expectation is presence. The expectation is to be an active learner in that environment. And so what I have seen many times is participation points actually carry someone across the finish line that maybe should not have been carried across the finish line. And that is that student passed the course by the skin of their teeth because of 20% participation, and that is they showed up each time. You know, maybe they said something when they were called upon. So these are really philosophical issues that we can talk about in live seminars. I also do not believe in extra credit, but for any reason, and that is that as long as you have fair evaluation methods, that you shouldn't need extra credit points to pad someone's grade to get them again across the finish line. And if you're doing that, then you have to ask yourself, is this fair to the student to get through my course to fail later on down the curriculum? Is this fair to this student's future patience that, again, I gave extra credit points so that she could pass this course when really she didn't have the capability? So these are very important philosophical issues that I think, again, we can talk about a lot in the live seminars. And this is the time, especially as you're into your second nurse educator course, where you have to start taking yourself out of your student role and say, I want extra credit, to your teacher role and say, what are those extra credit points doing for this student and for the patients that they might have down the road? So we have to make that role transition and start, this is your second nurse educator course, so start thinking like an educator, right, instead of thinking like a student. Because I know as a student, you want participation points and you want extra credit points, right? But as a teacher, you have to think about the consequences of doing that. This was a fun little comic that I found, and to talk about writing assignments, and I hope you enjoy that. I'll let you read that. There are multiple non-exam methods of evaluation, and I listed just a few here. Writing assignments. Let me just tell you first of all that writing assignments are an investment. I personally think they are an important investment in the learner, but they do require a lot of time for grading. And so if you have very large classes, then you have to say, well, you know, wow, can I really do this? Can I really get these graded, you know, and back to them in a timely fashion? Some of this you learn over time, and that is one of my first classes. I had 150 students for a leadership class. I told you all about that before. And I actually had them doing weekly reflective journals for 150 students. And that's pretty much what I did that semester, is read those self-reflective journals. And I think that the students didn't expect me to read them. And I read them every word. I corrected their writing and their punctuation and their grammar. That I gave the assignment. I had to fulfill the assignment. And that is that I really did read them, and I really did, in essence, grade them. Mostly I gave them feedback and graded the self-reflection. Presentations are a great way. You can do those presentations individually or group presentations. Discussion. One of the problems with giving points for discussion and for participation, truly, is trying to figure out who really did participate in a good way. And sometimes you get people who are just talking because they need their points, and they're not really talking in a valuable way, and that's quite troublesome. So you get people who are just basically, oh, got to get my points today, got to say something, got to get my points today. So discussion, participation, thinking about those methods. I generally use some type of a writing assignment. I have presentations and tests. Also, discussion boards, self-reflective journals, those kind of things. Those are my preferred evaluation methods. I need to know, too, from the students what their preferred evaluation method is and try to meet their needs as much as possible. I want them to show me that they know the information that they're developing, and they need to be able to do that in their preferred mode, too. So these are what I call Robin's recommendations, and these are not necessarily, you must do this, but this is what I believe. This is part of my teaching philosophy, is I believe you should always have non-exam points. I don't believe you should ever have a course where 100% of someone's exam is based, or 100% of their grade is based on examinations. Those other assignments, like writing, presentations, etc., you need to have detailed rubrics for objective evaluation. And the students need to see those rubrics in advance so that they know exactly what will get them, as I like to say, full points, right? And that is, look at that column that says this is exemplary, this will get you full points, and strive for that particular column. I also do not believe that any one assignment should be worth more than 30% of a student's grade. And that is, I shouldn't have a final or a midterm that is worth more than 30% of a student's grade. That is just too high stakes for the student. They need to be able to have a weekday, right? And if they have a day, you know, during the final where they're not really thinking well, they're not really feeling well or whatever, yes, they can talk to you about that, and you can deal with that at the time. But again, most students are going to go in and take the test, have an off day, not do well, and that's 30%, 40%, 50% of their grade. I don't believe in that. So I like to have things that spread out so that one item is not more than 30%. If you are giving frequent quizzes, and again, you have to ask yourself, are you using these quizzes formatively or summatively? And if you are, like for instance, you may, and I have before said, okay, in this particular semester, we're going to have a test, a quiz, every third week. And that means for this semester, you're going to have 5 of those. They're all equally weighted. Well, I'm not going to allow you to make up a test. Okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, we are going to count the top 4 of those 5 tests. Those are going to be the 4 that are going to count. Okay? I'm going to have some non-exam points in there too, you know, because that's part of my philosophy. But of the exams, if there were 5 of them, I would likely let them drop the lowest one. Again, weekday, not, you know, not as hot on this content as they could have been, and so on. So consider that, especially if you're not doing makeups. The other thing that this does, dropping the lowest score, is students will be there to take the quiz because they don't want to give up the chance of dropping their lowest score that they actually receive. They don't want the drop to be the 0 where they weren't there. They want the drop to be the 70 when they were there and they didn't do well. So let's talk more about rubrics, and I do love to talk about rubrics, and you can probably tell from your assignment descriptions that I enjoy developing rubrics, and I think that they are very important to us as educators. A rubric is a scoring tool that sets out very specific expectations for an assignment or an end product, and it communicates to the student what the expectation is. So the purpose of a rubric is to communicate the quality expectation for a particular assignment or task, and it identifies criteria for the assessment of that particular assignment in very objective terms. It identifies levels of achievement, and a lot of times we use the does not meet criteria, meets criteria, exceeds criteria. You know, something like that. You can decide what you're going to label those. If you label those F, C, B, A, that's another way to do it, right? So you're describing what A activity is, B activity is, C activity, and a failing activity. So when are they used? Well, they're used when judging performance on assignments is likely to be subjective and difficult to grade accurately and fairly. And even with rubrics, I think that we can all accept that there is a subjective aspect to grading papers and presentations and any of those things. The rubric is just to make it more objective and fair and consistent across students. I think that's really important. Things that we might use rubrics for: presentations, writing assignments, posters, portfolios, care plans, concept maps. All of those certainly warrant the use of a rubric. So who uses them? Certainly teachers use them for grading, and students use them to clearly identify what the expectation is. So I will give certainly credit to this next section that was developed by a colleague of mine, and then I've tweaked it a bit. And her name is Anita Dempsey, and I worked with her at University of Cincinnati, and so we've kind of worked on this presentation together. And so she kind of came up with this, what I think is kind of comical. How do you know you need a rubric? You know you need a rubric when you're getting carpal tunnel syndrome from writing the same comments on almost every student paper. And you will certainly find that for sure. You need one when you've graded all the papers and you worry about that the last ones are graded slightly different from the first ones, for sure. It's 3 a.m. The stack of papers on your desk is fast approaching the ceiling. And you know, of course, you're going to be up all night. And maybe not done then either. I do think that rubrics are quite objective. I'm not sure how much they actually speed grading. but they certainly make grading more objective. You certainly need a rubric when you give a long narrative description of the assignment in the syllabus and students keep asking questions. Again, what you're trying to do is establish what that, again, full points column is, and that is, what do you, if the student wants an A, what do they have to do? This is a very important point for me, and that is when you work with colleagues and collaborate for an assignment, a course, and you wonder if you're grading them different. And you certainly hear students say, well, you know, take so-and-so's class. She grades a lot easier. Don't go there. She grades a lot harder. Actually, right now I'm teaching a course with 5 other instructors teaching evidence-based practice, and I'm the course lead, and I developed probably extremely detailed rubrics to say, we all need to be using this rubric. We all need to be consistent. Students in one section should not feel like they're in an advantage because someone isn't using the rubric or they're using the rubric very loosely. This is the rubric. We're all using the rubric. That's crucially important. You've been disappointed by whole assignments because all or most of your class turned out to be unaware of academic expectations, so basic that you neglected to mention them. And that's what the rubric does. And I find that every single time that I give an assignment, even in the same course, I need to tweak that rubric. Because when I'm grading, I think, oh my gosh, I didn't think I needed to say that. And then I figure I really did need to say that, and it really should be on the rubric. So you're clarifying expectations for you as faculty, including a faculty group and students. It certainly does increase the quality of the work when they know what the expectation is. And then it also allows you to provide timely feedback. And what I do, and you'll certainly see this, is I take the rubric and I grade them according to the rubric, and then I copy and paste that rubric to the end of their writing assignment, for instance. If it's a presentation, I take that rubric and I email it to the student, so the student clearly sees where they lost points. I think that's important. Provide timely feedback. It can do that. I will say again that writing assignments take a lot of time for me, and I put a lot of comments, I give a lot of feedback. The rubric basically just helps me show more clearly what the weak areas of the paper or the assignment were. Encourages critical thinking, facilitates communication. It refines our teaching method. Again, each time you give this assignment, you'll notice that you need to be a little bit more clear or change something. And most importantly is it really does level the playing field for the students. The students all have the information about what the expectation of the assignment is. So building a rubric, you need to first of all consider what are the critical aspects of the assignment. What are the criteria? And then determine how many points each one of those is going to be given. Those could be the components of the paper. With a presentation, it could be, the visuals, the presentation skills, and then the content. So decide how you want to distribute those points. For concept maps, I really like points for creativity. I want color and pictures and sound, and I want it wild and crazy. I like to see the creativity. So decide what are the most crucial components of the assignment, and then decide how many points you're going to give to each one of those. I will tell you that one of the things that I learn most of all when I develop rubrics is it's very self-reflective for me. And that is, I learn a lot about what's important to me, because I do that by saying, how many points do I give to writing and grammar? How many points do I give to creativity? It actually helps to clarify your own value system when you look at the criteria and the weighting of each criterion. And then I personally always start with the full points column, and that is I start with the exemplary column. And a lot of times the column on over just says one or more crucial components missing, you know, of the full points column. And a lot of this just requires a lot of playing with. It is more than just putting the objectives on a grid. And I found that when I taught this class the last time, is I got a lot of rubrics that basically just had the course objectives and in a table with a grid. You have to say what constitutes a failing, what constitutes minimum acceptable, and certainly what constitutes an exemplary. There are two types of rubrics, and these are defined in McDonald. One is called holistic, where all of the elements of the assignment are actually considered in a combined method. So for instance, you would describe what an A paper looks like, and then describe what a B paper looks like, right? So everything is in there. So for instance, for that A paper, you would say what will get you 90 to 100% on this paper. An analytic rubric, which is what I always use, the individual elements are scored separately. So that I would have, for instance, creativity, writing and grammar, APA, content then would be broken into smaller increments so that it's an analytic type rubric. A lot of times teachers will say, here's a rubric, and they just give you a list of things that should be in the assignment and how many points you're going to get for each one of those. I'm sorry, but I don't think that's a rubric, okay? That's basically saying these are the crucial components of the paper, and this is the distribution of points for that. But they haven't gone on to say at what level do you get those full points. And I think that that's crucially important to communicate to students, and it's why I work so hard on the development of my rubrics. So this is, for instance, kind of a basic rubric that you can see what I did here is I said, you know, they didn't have this component at all. They had it, but it didn't meet standard. It met standard, or it exceeded the standard. And then I would go on for criterion 1, for instance, and describe what they, you know, that they didn't even describe that at all. That not meeting the standard, what would that be? Meeting the standard, what would that be? And exceeding the standard, what would that be? So these are descriptions in each one of these blocks for what those levels of accomplishment for each of those criterion would be. You notice under weight that I have, in this case I have a 1, and that would be, for instance, in this particular rubric, if I said criterion 1, if I put a 2 under weight, then that would say I would take the 3 for exceed standard and multiply times 2 and then get their score. So if we look at the weighting, again, the weighting is telling you about your value system and how important you think criterion 1 is. If criterion 1 you think is really important, then the weight may be a 2, or the weight may even be a 3. And then criterion 2, you know, not as important, I'm going to have the weight there be a 1. And so when I take everything and multiply it out for the possibles, then I clearly identify what the possible score is. Do keep in mind that possible scores don't have to be 100. They don't have to be 10. They don't have to be increments of 10. And that's because our grading systems today clearly allow for the weighting of scores. And that is, for instance, if I say this particular paper is worth 42 points, and this particular paper is worth 30% of your grade, then basically what I do is I say to the scoring system, the grading system in the computer, whether it's Blackboard or 2GU, that the possible for this particular assignment is 42. And then when I put the score in essence, it says, okay, they got 36 of 42, and that 36 of 42, whatever percentage that comes out to be, is worth this particular percentage of their grade. So don't get so hung up on making sure that the points possible is 100. That's not necessary with the way that our computer programs work things these days. I think some people still do it, but it's not necessary. So let me give you some examples of some rubrics. So this is one that I just picked up from the web, and you can see where I picked it up. And what you see here is basically this is a nursing process assignment for an undergraduate. And you know what they identify as the criterion and what they see as outstanding, satisfactory, or unsatisfactory. I think this is, you know, again, my cognitive processes. I like for the full points one to be at the right, because we do read from left to right. And so to me, the minimum should be at the left and the maximum should be at the right. That's just me. That's the way I think. Whatever works for you. And so what you can see is each square in this grid clearly identifies what the expectation is to be considered satisfactory. Now, what I would do for this is to say outstanding would get you 2 points, satisfactory would get you 1, unsatisfactory would get you 0, or something like that. And then for each grid point, for each grid here, you would have a point value. And then you would add up all those points at the end. And the reason I say that is because they may very well be quite satisfactory in one area and unsatisfactory in another area and outstanding in another area, right? So each particular point in the grid is assigned a point value. This is one that I developed, and this one is related to, this is related to discussion board. And so with discussion board, you can see that I have 6 points for content and voice, and I'm really looking at whether or not they have integrated the content into their thinking, and they're reflecting their thinking and the effect of that reading and thinking, for lack of a better term again. And then, do they have references? How many do they have? And then, because if I'm doing discussion board is not just I think. You have to substantiate your opinion. What makes you think that? And then finally, because I firmly believe that writing skills are crucially important to educated people, that there are points assigned for grammar and spelling and punctuation and so on. So this was a discussion board grid. And what you see again is what I have are point values to all. You notice I have a little playroom. You can tell that, for instance, content and voice, if I had made this 0, 1, 2, 3 for the columns, then you would see content and voice had a weight of 2. Because I did the grids individually, you can see that I gave 6 points for full points for content and voice, 4 for, 6 for excellent, 4 for good, 2 for fair, and 0 for poor. So you can tell that I weighted content and voice more than I weighted sources and more than I weighted grammar and spelling. This just keeps you from having to multiply. So constructing a rubric, you kind of have to reflect and listen, group and label, apply, and then always revisit. Every time you use it, you have to go back and say, did it work? How can I make it work better? You're going to be certainly designing your own rubric for your final assessment. And if you need help with that in any way, I'm certainly available to do that. And then these are 2 online resources that you can use. One is called Rubistar, and one is called iRubric. And you have multiple online resources in your module that can help you in terms of rubrics and clinical evaluation rubrics. Those of you who are in the practice setting, professional development setting, you might very well do an evaluation tool for the end of the first week of a new graduate. That would be interesting. So that concludes this particular presentation on I'll call it alternate assignments or non-exam assignments, and the evaluation of those non-exam assignments using rubrics and how to develop rubrics. And we'll, again, as always, have some lively discussion about this in the live seminars. Thank you.